What would you do if the people closest to you turned your deepest grief into mockery? Imagine standing at your husband's funeral, still carrying his child inside you, and watching his family twist the inheritance into their own pockets. The house? Gone. The business? Stolen. And to you, only a rusted trailer, tossed at your feet like trash. It's all you deserve, peasant, they sneered, laughing as your world collapsed. Naomi was left with nothing, no roof, no food, no safety. Just whispers of gossip in the streets, and a child waiting to be born. Neighbors said, now she'll know misery. And for a while, they were right. The trailer smelled of mold. The walls crumbled with every storm. And every night she cried herself to sleep, wondering how she would survive another day. But what her enemies thought was her prison was hiding a secret so powerful it could change everything. Behind the rust, beneath the decay, lay something no one could have imagined. Something worth more than all they had stolen combined. And Naomi, the widow they mocked, would soon discover it. This is not just a story about injustice. It's a story of survival, of a mother's love, of resilience buried in the most unlikely of places. It's about how the very thing meant to break her became the key to her rebirth. Stay until the end, because the twist you're about to hear will change the way you look at betrayal, poverty, and even freedom itself. Naomi's journey is proof that sometimes the world's cruelest gifts carry within them the seeds of salvation. The church bells echoed through the heavy air, their metallic toll mixing with the sobs of a grieving woman. Naomi stood by the coffin, her hands trembling as if she could still feel her husband's warmth slipping away. The scent of fresh lilies filled the room, but it did little to mask the smell of sorrow. Around her, whispers spread like smoke, each one a reminder that she was now a widow. Her eyes locked on the wooden box, her only anchor in a world that suddenly fell hollow. She clutched her stomach gently, life growing inside her, even as death had stolen what she loved most. At the funeral, relatives gathered in dark suits and cold expressions. Their words were polite, but their eyes were sharp, calculating. Naomi could feel the distance between her and them. Like a wall built of judgment and envy, they did not embrace her pain. They dissected it, waiting for the moment to take advantage. Behind the forced condolences, greed was already stirring. She knew it, but she was too broken to fight. For now, her only task was to breathe through the storm of loss. Days later, the family assembled in a dusty office for the reading of the will. The smell of old paper and fading ink hung in the air. Naomi sat quietly in the corner, her heart pounding like a drum of doom. The lawyer cleared his throat and began to speak, his monotone voice slicing through her fragile hope. With every sentence, Naomi's world shifted further out of reach. Her husband's legacy, his house, his business, was slipping into hands of those who had always despised her. She looked at her in-laws, their smug smiles growing as the lawyer's words unfolded. They had manipulated the documents, twisted the law in their favor. Naomi's voice caught in her throat, but no words came out. She was surrounded, outnumbered, and powerless. The house where she had dreamed of raising her child, the store her husband had worked so hard to build, all were claimed by them. Their laughter was like knives cutting into her soul. Every sound deepened her humiliation. When the final paper was signed, the relatives turned toward her with mocking eyes. "You deserve something too," one of them said, tossing a pair of rusty keys onto the table. They belonged to an old trailer, abandoned on the edge of town. The room erupted in laughter, cruel and merciless. "That's all you'll ever need," another sneered. The word widow now carried not only grief, but disgrace. Naomi's hands shook as she picked up the keys, her face burning with shame. The image of the trailer haunted her mind. She remembered passing it once. A rotting shell, its windows broken, its walls eaten by rust. It was no home, no shelter, just a cruel reminder of how little they valued her. Still, it was all she had left. She pressed the keys into her palm until the edges dug into her skin. Somewhere deep inside, anger stirred beneath the grief. But for now, the tears were stronger. For now, survival seemed impossible. Whispers followed her as she left the office. Neighbors who once praised her husband now shook their heads. Rumors spread faster than the wind. She lost everything, she's doomed to poverty. The humiliation clung to her like a second skin. Every step felt heavier, as if she carried the weight of every cruel word. Her child moved inside her womb, a reminder that she could not give up, no matter how dark the road ahead seemed. But the future stretched before her like a barren desert, endless and merciless. That night, Naomi sat alone on the edge of the bed that no longer felt like hers. The house was still under her roof, but she knew she would soon be forced to leave. She stared at the keys lying on the table. They were small, almost meaningless, yet they pulsed with the power to define her fate. Was this really all her husband had left for her? Or was there something hidden behind this cruel joke? She could not tell, not yet. The sound of rain tapping against the window made the silence heavier. She closed her eyes, but sleep would not come. Memories of her husband's laughter, his promises of safety, clashed with the bitter reality of betrayal. Naomi whispered to herself, "I will survive. I must." Yet deep down, fear gnawed at her heart. Could she raise her unborn child inside a broken shell of metal? Could she face the world with nothing but rusted walls for protection? The questions had no answers. As dawn crept across the sky, Naomi stood by the window, the keys clenched tightly in her hand. The sun painted the world in shades of gold, mocking her with its beauty. Somewhere, life was moving forward, but hers seemed frozen in despair. And yet, a quiet spark flickered in her chest. Perhaps the trailer was not just an end, perhaps it was a beginning she could not yet see. But to find out, she would have to face the cruelest chapter of her life, the chapter of humiliation and survival. Naomi arrived at the trailer with trembling hands, the rusted keys cold against her skin. The metal door creaked like a wounded animal as she forced it open. A wave of dampness and mold hit her nose, making her gag. Inside, the air was heavy, suffocating. The floor sagged under her weight, and broken furniture leaned against the walls like skeletons of forgotten past. It was not a home. It was a tomb of despair. Yet it was all she had left. She stepped further inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. Cobwebs hung from every corner, swaying gently as if mocking her presence. The mattress in the corner was torn, its stuffing spilling like entrails. The sink dripped endlessly, each drop echoing in the hollow silence. Naomi wrapped her arms around her stomach, trying to shield her unborn child from the ugliness around them. "This is our shelter," she whispered, though the words felt like poison in her mouth. Nights inside the trailer were colder than she expected. The wind slipped through the cracks, whistling secrets of misery. She wrapped herself in an old blanket, the fabric rough and thin, unable to keep her warm. Hunger gnawed at her, sharper than the chill. There were days when she had nothing but stale bread to eat, and she would go without so her unborn child could survive. Each rumble of her stomach was another reminder of how far she had fallen. The neighbors noticed her new life quickly. Gossip traveled faster than fire. "Now she'll know misery," one woman hissed outside her window. "The widow thought she was better than us," another added. Their voices dripped with venom, eager to see her broken. Naomi tried to shut them out, but every word pierced her heart. Shame became her shadow, following her wherever she went. She no longer lifted her head when walking through town. Pride had been stripped from her. At night, when silence finally wrapped the world, Naomi cried softly into her pillow. Tears dampened the fabric until it smelled of salt and sorrow. She thought of her husband, of his laughter, and the way he once promised, "You'll always be safe with me." The words haunted her now, echoing in the hollow space of the trailer. If he had loved her so deeply, why had he left her nothing? Or was this truly the cruel plan of those who hated her most? Her strength came only when she placed her hand over her belly. The baby kicked gently, reminding her she was not alone. "I will protect you," she whispered through her tears. That promise gave her reason to keep breathing, to keep fighting, even when despair tried to suffocate her. But as the days passed, survival demanded sacrifice. She sold her wedding ring for food. She pawned her last good dress for a box of medicine. Each loss was another wound, but each kept her child alive. Weeks turned into months, and Naomi adapted to her prison of rust. She patched holes with scraps of fabric, cleaned the floor with buckets of rainwater, and turned broken wood into crude shelves. The trailer still smelled of decay, but slowly it became livable. She learned how to stretch every coin, how to turn one loaf of bread into meals for days. Poverty had taught her lessons no school ever could: resilience, endurance, and silence in the face of cruelty. Still, whispers never stopped. People pointed as she walked by. "Look at her," they sneered, from a big house to a rusted box. Naomi carried their laughter like chains, but she did not break. Instead, she buried her pain deep inside. Behind her weary eyes, a quiet fire began to burn. Every insult, every rumor, every humiliation became fuel. She knew her enemies expected her to collapse, but something in her heart whispered that she was not finished yet. One stormy night, Naomi sat at the small table inside the trailer, listening to the thunder outside. Water dripped from the ceiling, forming muddy puddles at her feet. Her hands reached for a rag to clean, and her fingers brushed against a patch of rust on the wall. Something felt different under her touch. A spark of curiosity lit her tired mind. She grabbed a knife and began to scrape gently at the metal. Beneath the layers of rust, a faint glimmer appeared, unlike anything she had seen before. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just rust. It wasn't just decay. Something was hidden beneath, something shining, something secret. The old trailer that had been given to her as a curse was beginning to whisper of a hidden truth. And Naomi, broken and humiliated, stood on the edge of a discovery that would change everything. Naomi stared at the faint glimmer hidden beneath the wall of rust. Her heart pounded, echoing louder than the thunder outside. She rubbed her tired eyes, wondering if despair had finally made her hallucinate. But when the next flash of lightning illuminated the trailer, the shimmer remained. It wasn't her imagination. It was real. Something valuable lay hidden in the very place that had humiliated her. The keys her in-laws mocked her with, they had unlocked more than just a shelter of misery. Her fingers trembled as she scraped away more of the corroded surface. Tiny flakes of iron fell to the floor, revealing a golden glow underneath. She gasped, her breath shallow, her chest tightening with disbelief. The glow grew brighter with each stroke, until a corner of solid gold peeked through the ruin. Naomi staggered backward, her knees nearly giving out. She clutched her stomach, whispering to her unborn child, "Do you see this? Do you feel this? Your father, he left us something." She sat in stunned silence, staring at the impossible truth. For months, she had cursed the trailer as a symbol of shame, of betrayal, of defeat. But now it pulsed with a new meaning. Every insult, every laugh from her in-laws suddenly echoed differently. They thought they had buried her in poverty. But what if this trailer was not their victory, but her hidden salvation? The irony struck her so deep she could hardly breathe. The widow, mocked and forgotten, was holding a secret brighter than the sun. Naomi couldn't tell anyone. She knew the danger of speaking too soon. If rumor spread, greedy hands would claw their way into her life once again. So she covered the golden patch with rags, disguising it as nothing more than rust and mold. Her heart raced as she planned her next steps. The secret had to stay between her and the unborn child she carried. "This is ours," she whispered, placing her hand over her belly. "Our safety net, our freedom." The following day, she tested the truth of what she'd seen. She chipped away another small piece of the golden wall, careful not to make noise that would attract attention. When the fragment fell into her hand, the weight was undeniable, solid, heavy, precious. She wrapped it quickly in cloth and hid it beneath her clothes. Her body shook with both fear and hope. For the first time since the funeral, her steps felt lighter, her heart alive with possibility. Poverty no longer felt eternal. Naomi traveled miles away to a small jeweler known for asking no questions. The little shop smelled of dust and metal, its glass cases filled with rings and necklaces that sparkled under dim light. She laid the fragment on the counter, her voice trembling as she asked, "Can you tell me what this is worth?" The jeweler's eyes widened, his mouth falling open slightly. This is pure," he whispered, weighing it carefully. Naomi's pulse raced. For the first time in months, she held money in her hands. Money enough for food, clothes, and medicine. Walking back home, she pressed the coins tightly to her chest. every corner. Every shadow on the road made her glance over her shoulder. Fear haunted her. Fear that someone might discover the secret. Fear that her in-laws might return to strip her of everything again. But beneath that fear was something stronger. Hope. The trailer was no longer a cage. It was a treasure chest, and only she knew the key. That knowledge gave her courage, the strength to imagine a life beyond survival. She began selling small pieces, always careful, always discreet. One fragment became bread. Another became medicine for her pregnancy. Another clothed her child before birth. Each exchange was a quiet victory, a step away from despair and closer to freedom. The goal was not just wealth. It was a message from her late husband, a hidden whisper of protection. He had known the cruelty of his family. He had prepared a shield for her, disguised as ruin, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. The more she uncovered, the more her faith grew. Naomi no longer felt like the helpless widow everyone pitied. She was a woman holding a secret so powerful it could change her destiny. She smiled for the first time in months, a real smile, though tears still rolled down her cheeks. Her neighbors still gossiped, still laughed, but she carried their words differently now. They mocked her trailer, not knowing it was lined with gold. Every insult became a reminder that the world only sees what it wants to see. One night, as the moonlight filtered through the broken window, Naomi sat on the floor, her child stirring inside her. She looked at the rusted walls that had treasures untold. "One day," she whispered, "you'll know this story. You'll know how we survived, how we rose." Her eyes glowed with quiet fire, no longer just a victim, but keep her a secret that could rewrite her life. But keeping such a secret came with risk, and Naomi's silence would soon be tested in ways she could never imagine. Naomi woke before dawn, her mind racing. The trailer was no longer just rust and rot. It was a vault, a lifeline. But survival now demanded more than discovery. It demanded wisdom. She pressed her palm against her belly, whispering, "No one must know." The secret was too dangerous to share, even with those who seemed kind. Greed had already stolen her home and her business once. If anyone discovered the truth, it would all happen again. Silence was her shield. She began living two lives. To the outside world, she was still the poor widow, surviving inside a rusted trailer that smelled of mold. Neighbors still mocked, spreading gossip in the marketplace. "She'll never escape poverty," they laughed. Naomi lowered her head and pretended to accept their words. But behind her quiet eyes burned a different reality. At night, when no one watched, she chipped tiny fragments of gold from the hidden walls and tucked them away in cloth pouches. Each fragment carried both fear and promise. She traveled to distant towns, always choosing shops where the owners asked no questions. The smell of fire and metal filled these places, where jewelers melted her pieces into silence. With trembling hands, she accepted the coins, never too much at once, never enough to raise suspicion. The money was survival, food for her table, medicine for her body, clothes for her unborn child. Every sale was a step further from despair, but also a step deeper into secrecy. Her neighbors noticed small changes. Naomi no longer looked as starved. The dark circles under her eyes faded. Her clothes were simple but clean. Some whispered that she found a secret lover, someone rich who pitied her. Others insisted she had stolen from a market. Rumors swirled like smoke, each one crueler than the last. Naomi never defended herself. Words could not hurt her anymore. She knew the truth, and the truth was worth more than all their lies combined. With careful planning, Naomi began saving a little beyond her daily needs. Coins stacked in a small box hidden under loose floorboards, safe beneath her bed. She counted them late at night, her heart racing with each clink of metal. That sound was not just money, it was freedom whispering her name. She dreamed of a day when her child would no longer sleep in a rotting trailer, but in a real home. A day when no gossip, no humiliation, no debt could touch her. Weeks passed, and her box grew heavier. She bought fresh food, real bread, warm milk. She repaired her shoes. She even purchased a book of recipes, a fragile luxury she had once taken for granted. Naomi began to see herself not as a victim, but as a woman rebuilding her life brick by brick, coin by coin. The gold had given her a chance, but her discipline was what transformed it into survival. She was learning not only to live, but to plan. The greatest test of her secrecy came one evening when a cousin appeared at her door. His eyes scanned the trailer with suspicion. "How are you surviving here?" he asked, his tone sharp. Naomi forced a tired smile, gesturing at the broken furniture and leaking roof. "I manage," she replied softly. He laughed cruelly, shaking his head. "You'll never rise again." Naomi lowered her eyes, hiding the fire in her soul. If only he knew the truth buried behind these walls. By the time her child was born, Naomi had saved enough to dream bigger. The trailer could no longer hold her future. It was time to plant roots. With cautious steps, she rented a small corner space in town. Nothing more than cracked walls and a squeaky door. But in her eyes, it was a palace of possibility. She scrubbed it clean, filled it with a second-hand table and chairs, and hung a small sign outside. Café Esperanza, Hope Cafe. At first, the shop was quiet. Only a few passers-by stopped for tea or bread. But Naomi welcomed each customer with warmth, her smile honest, her hand steady. The scent of fresh coffee drifted through the streets, and slowly word spread. People began returning, bringing friends, bringing stories. What started as survival became something bigger, a place of community. Naomi was no longer just a widow in the trailer. She was the woman who gave the town comfort. She was growing. But even as laughter filled her cafe, Naomi never forgot the trailer. Every evening, she walked back to the rusted walls, where her secret still slept behind iron and decay, to the world. It was nothing but a shell of misery. To Naomi, it was a silent partner in her rebirth. And as her business grew, so did the danger. For secrets never stay buried forever, and Naomi's golden truth was too powerful to remain hidden much longer. The mornings in Naomi's cafe began quietly, with the smell of freshly brewed coffee floating into the streets. The tiny shop, once cracked and lifeless, now glowed with warmth. Wooden tables, polished by her hands, reflected the soft light of the rising sun. Customers came slowly at first, an old man seeking comfort in a warm drink, a mother buying bread for her children. Naomi greeted each with tenderness, her eyes carrying a strength they did not yet understand. The widow in the trailer was becoming someone new. She poured every coin she earned back into the business. With careful hands, she bought better cups, fresher beans, sweeter pastries. The shelves that once stood empty now carried jars of honey and loaves of bread, their golden crusts catching the morning light. Naomi no longer walked with her head bowed. She stood taller, her child in her arms, her smile lighting the room like a lantern in darkness. People began whispering not of her misery, but of her kindness. The cafe became more than a shop. It became a gathering place. Neighbors who once mocked her now sat at her tables, sipping tea and sharing stories. Travelers paused to rest, finding comfort in her food. Children laughed as she slipped them small candies, a gesture of love that reminded her of her late husband's gentle spirit. The walls of the cafe absorbed joy, hope, and resilience. It was no longer just business. It was a living symbol of her survival. Every night, after closing, Naomi returned to the trailer. Its rusted frame stood quietly at the edge of town, ignored by everyone else. To strangers, it looked abandoned, unworthy of notice. But Naomi knew its secret. She touched its walls, feeling the hidden treasure still embedded inside. It had become her silent ally, the unseen force behind her transformation. The trailer, once a curse, now carried the story of her freedom. Its broken windows reflected the fire in her eyes. As the months passed, the cafe flourished. Naomi hired a young boy to help sweep floors and carry trays. Customers lined up outside her door, eager for her warm bread and gentle words. Coins filled her cash box faster than she could count them. What had started with fragments of gold was now becoming something greater, roots sinking into the heart of her community. Naomi had turned whispers of shame into songs of respect. She was no longer just surviving. She was thriving. Her child grew healthy, laughter filling their small home behind the cafe. Naomi often watched the boy play, his tiny hands grabbing at crumbs of bread, his eyes full of light. She whispered to him, "You will never know the hunger I knew. You will never feel the humiliation I carried." Each word was a promise stitched into the fabric of their new life. The cafe was not just a rebirth. It was his inheritance, her true gift to him. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Naomi stood outside her shop, gazing at the people gathered inside. The sound of chatter and clinking cups filled the air like music. She pressed her hand to her chest, whispering, "We are free." For the first time, she believed it fully. The trailer had given her pain, but it had also given her strength. And now, that strength had blossomed into a life she had once thought impossible. But freedom carried shadows. Her in-laws, the same ones who had laughed as they handed her rusted keys, were not blind to her success. From a distance, they watched the cafe grow, their curiosity sharpening into envy. "How is she surviving?" they whispered among themselves. "Where'd she find the money?" Questions burned in their greedy minds. They who had once mocked her now wondered if the trailer had been worth more than they believed. Naomi felt their eyes before she saw them. She noticed them lurking in the marketplace, whispering as she walked by. Her heart tightened, but she kept her smile steady. They had stolen her home, her inheritance, her dignity. She would not let them steal her freedom. Yet she knew that greed does not sleep. The same hands that had taken everything once would not hesitate to try again. The danger was growing, like storm clouds gathering over her peace. That night, Naomi sat in the trailer once more, the golden walls hidden in silence. She whispered into the dark, "They don't know. They'll never know." But as the wind howled outside, a chill ran down her spine. Her cafe was thriving. Her child was safe, her life reborn. Yet the very people who once destroyed her stood on the edge of ruin themselves. And fate was preparing a confrontation, one where the oppressors would finally face their fall. The years that followed brought silence into Naomi's life, but it was a kind of silence filled with peace. Her cafe flourished, her child grew strong, and the trailer remained untouched, its secret still hidden behind layers of rust. Yet, as Naomi's world blossomed, her in-laws' world began to crumble. The same hands that stole her inheritance were stained with greed and mismanagement. Their laughter, once sharp and cruel, now dissolved into arguments behind closed doors. The business they had seized from Naomi's husband began to collapse. Customers vanished, trust evaporated, and debts piled higher than their pride. They spent recklessly, certain that wealth would never abandon them. But bankruptcy lurked like a shadow they couldn't escape. Creditors knocked at their doors, demanding money they no longer had. The house they had once guarded so proudly became a prison of unpaid bills and sleepless nights. Whispers spread through the town, the same way they once spread about Naomi. "The family is falling apart," people said. "Their business is ruined. Their debts are too high." Naomi listened in silence, never speaking a word against them. She didn't need revenge. Their downfall was writing itself. The same mouths that once laughed at her were now whispering pity for them. The irony was so sharp it almost cut through the air. Naomi saw them one day in the marketplace. Their clothes were no longer new. Their eyes carried the weight of shame. They avoided her gaze, but she saw the desperation etched into their faces. The proud family that had mocked her rusted trailer was now sinking deeper into poverty than she had ever known. Her hands tightened around her basket, her child tugging at her skirt, unaware of the silent battle of glances that passed between them. Rumors reached her that their house was up for auction. The business, once thriving, had closed its doors. Even their jewelry, once flaunted at parties, was sold to cover debts. They had mocked Naomi for losing everything, yet now they faced the same abyss. People said they thought themselves untouchable, but greed devoured them. Naomi walked past the gossip, her heart steady. Justice was unfolding without her lifting a finger. One stormy evening, Naomi closed her cafe early and stepped outside to lock the door. Across the street, she saw her in-laws huddled beneath the rain, arguing, their voices cracking with anger and despair. For a moment, memories flooded back, of the funeral, of the cruel laughter, of the rusted keys thrown at her like an insult. Yet instead of hatred, she felt something unexpected: freedom. Their misery no longer chained her heart. Her neighbors began comparing the two families. Naomi, once broken, had risen from ashes. Her cafe was a beacon of hope, her child a symbol of resilience. Her in-laws, once powerful, had become a cautionary tale. "Look how far she has come," they said, "and look how far they have fallen." The shift in the town's whispers was a mirror of justice. Humiliation traded places, balance restored without a single shout or confrontation. But the collapse of her oppressors was not quiet enough. Desperation drove the proud to places they once scorned. Naomi knew it was only a matter of time before they came to her. She saw the hunger in their eyes, the way they lingered near her cafe. The scent of fresh bread and roasted coffee seemed to draw them like moths to a flame. And though she feared the moment, she also knew it was inevitable. One afternoon, as her cafe bustled with customers, Naomi caught sight of them through the window. Her in-laws, disheveled and tired, stood outside. Their eyes were hollow, their clothes wet from the rain. They hesitated at the door, pride and need waging war inside them. Naomi's hand shook slightly as she poured coffee, her heart preparing for the storm about to enter her new life. The past was knocking, demanding to be answered, and when they finally stepped inside, their faces painted with defeat, Naomi knew the day of reckoning had come. The same voices that once told her the trailer was all she deserved would now beg her for help. The confrontation she had never asked for was here, and this time she held the power. The bell above the cafe door rang softly as her in-laws stepped inside. Their once proud figures now looked small, hunched, and defeated. Naomi froze for a moment, the tray trembling slightly in her hands. Conversations in the cafe hushed as curious eyes turned toward the newcomers. The air grew heavy, the scent of coffee mixing with unspoken tension. Naomi's heart pounded, but she kept her back straight. This was the moment life had been preparing her for. They shuffled toward her counter, their eyes avoiding hers. The woman who once laughed the loudest at the funeral now kept her head lowered. The man who had thrown the rusted keys on the table clenched his fists nervously. "Naomi," he began, his voice dry, brittle. We've lost everything. The house, the business, it's all gone." His words cracked like old wood snapping in a fire. Naomi remained silent, her gaze steady, waiting. Finally, one of them spoke the words she knew were coming. "We need shelter, a place to stay, just until we get back on our feet." The irony of their plea hung in the air like a cruel joke. Naomi's customers glanced between them, sensing the storm brewing in her silence. The same family that had stripped her dignity now stood begging for mercy in a house she had rebuilt with her own hands. Naomi placed the tray gently on the counter, her fingers steady now. She let the silence stretch, forcing them to feel the weight of their request. Then, with a calm voice that cut deeper than any shout, she said, "Do you remember the day you told me the trailer was all I deserved?" Their eyes flickered, shame burning across their faces. "You laughed," she continued, her tone steady. "You mocked me while I was pregnant and grieving, and now you ask for my roof." Her words were not cruel. They were truth, truth that carried the weight of every night. She cried into a moldy pillow. Every day she had hungered behind a smile for her child. The cafe grew so silent that even the crackle of bread in the oven seemed loud. Her in-laws shifted uncomfortably, their pride shattered, their eyes glistening with humiliation. Naomi did not gloat, but neither did she bend. She had no hatred left in her, only clarity. "I survived the trailer," Naomi said, her voice low but powerful. "I built this with my own hands, with what you threw away, and I will never let you take it from me." She turned her back to them, pouring coffee as though they were no more than shadows passing through her cafe. The message was clear. She would not be their savior. They had chosen greed. She had chosen freedom. The two paths could never meet again. The man slammed his fist on the counter, desperation leaking into anger. "You can't just turn us away," he barked. But his words lacked the venom they once carried. Naomi lifted her chin, her eyes meeting his with unwavering strength. "I already did," she replied softly. The cafe customers stirred, their respect for Naomi burning brighter than ever. The family who once humiliated her now stood exposed, powerless, defeated. Tears slipped down the woman's cheeks as she whispered, "We have nowhere else to go." For a brief moment, Naomi felt the sting of her old heart, the part that once longed for acceptance, for family. But that heart had died in the ashes of betrayal. She turned toward her child, playing quietly in the corner, a living reminder of why she could never give in. "Neither did I," she said firmly, "and yet I rose." Her in-laws left in silence, their footsteps heavy with shame. The door closed behind them with a final chime of the bell, sealing the chapter of cruelty that had haunted her for years. Naomi stood still, her hands gripping the counter. She felt no triumph, no vengeance, only release. Justice had spoken not through her anger, but through her survival. She had rebuilt her life without them, and now they would face the shadows of their own choices. As Naomi watched them disappear into rain, her heart settled into a quiet peace. The ghosts of the past had come knocking, and she had faced them with dignity. She turned back to her cafe, where warmth, love, and community waited. Yet, in the corner of her mind, she knew one final step remained. The moment she would face the trailer itself, the symbol of her suffering and her salvation, and that moment would define her true freedom. That evening, after the confrontation, Naomi walked home under the fading light of dusk. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening like mirrors. In her hands, she carried a basket of bread and herbs for dinner. But her heart was not on the cafe or the customers. It was on the rusted trailer that still stood at the edge of town. The same place that once held her tears, her hunger, her humiliation. Tonight, she would face it not as a victim, but as a woman reborn. The trailer looked unchanged. Its windows were still cracked, its walls still streaked with rust, the ground around it overgrown with weeds. To anyone passing by, it was nothing but scrap metal waiting to collapse. But Naomi saw it differently now. Each dent, each scar, each broken piece told the story of her survival. She placed her hand against the cold metal and closed her eyes. Instead of shame, she felt gratitude. This shell had carried her through the storm. She opened the door and stepped inside. The smell of mold still lingered, faint but familiar. She could almost hear echoes of her past. The nights of sobbing, the mornings of hunger, the cruel voices whispering outside. But alongside those memories came others. The first spark of gold she uncovered, the first coin she held in her hand, the first meal she bought for her child with hope instead of despair. The trailer had not been her prison. It had been her chrysalis. Naomi walked slowly across the creaking floor, her fingers brushing the walls that hid treasures now nearly gone. The gold had given her a chance, but it had been her courage that turned it into life. She whispered softly, as if speaking to her late husband, "You kept your promise. You gave me a way to survive." For the first time, there was no bitterness in her voice, only peace. She had found safety not in the wealth itself, but in the strength that allowed her to build. Her child's laughter drifted through the door as he ran to join her. He tugged at her skirt, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Mama, why do you always come here?" he asked. Naomi knelt down, pulling him close, her eyes glistening. "Because this place saved us," she said. "People thought it was worthless, but inside it, we found the gold that gave us a new life. Never forget, my son, sometimes the world hides its treasures in the places everyone despises." She stepped outside again, holding her child's hand. The sunset painted the sky in strokes of gold and fire, as if the heavens themselves were honoring her journey. Naomi looked back at the trailer one last time. To others, it was still nothing but a rusted carcass. To her, it was the birthplace of her freedom. She smiled, a smile not a victory over others, but a victory over herself, over despair, over fear. Word of her in-laws' downfall continued to spread. Some pitied them, others mocked them, but Naomi wasted no breath on revenge. Their collapse was their own making. She did not need their apology, nor their approval. Her life had grown beyond their reach. The cafe, the community, the love she had built, all of it stood as her silent answer to their cruelty. Justice had already been served, not in punishment, but in her transformation. Naomi's story became a quiet legend in her town. Customers whispered about the widow who had risen from poverty, the woman who had turned shame into hope. No one ever knew the full truth of the trailer's secret. They only saw the results: a thriving cafe, a strong child, a woman who walked with dignity. Naomi let them wonder. Some secrets, she believed, were meant to remain hidden, their power preserved in silence. As night fell, Naomi lit a single candle in her window. Its glow spread across the street, warm and steady. She looked at her child asleep in his bed, safe and loved, and whispered, "We are free." Her heart no longer carried the weight of betrayal or humiliation. It carried roots planted deep, a new life built with courage, and a hope that stretched far beyond her own years. The trailer, the gold, the suffering, it had all led to this moment. And so, the widow once mocked with rusted keys stood tall in her truth. She had turned loss into life, rejection into rebirth, shame into freedom. The moral was clear. Treasures are often hidden in the ruins we are forced to endure. All it takes is faith, resilience, and love to transform them into hope. Naomi's trailer was never worthless. It was pure gold, and from it, she had built a future that no one could ever take away. Naomi's life had begun in ashes, lost, betrayal, humiliation. Her in-laws thought they had buried her beneath poverty, stripping her of every dignity she once held. But in the very ruins they handed her, she uncovered gold, not just a hidden treasure in the trailer, but the greater gold of resilience, courage, and love. She turned shame into strength. She turned whispers into silence. And she built a life where a child could laugh freely, no longer bound by the cruelty of others. The trailer, once a curse, became the birthplace of her freedom. It stood as proof that no matter how deep the pit, there's always a way out when faith and courage guide the heart. Her in-laws faced the weight of their choices. Debt, loss, and shame became their inheritance, while Naomi walked in dignity. She did not need revenge, because true justice was already served. The woman they tried to destroy had risen higher than they ever imagined. And now, her story is more than just survival. It's a reminder to us all. Life will hand us trials, sometimes wrapped in humiliation, sometimes disguised as ruin. But hidden within those moments are seeds of transformation. If Naomi could find hope in a rusted trailer, what hidden gold might be waiting in your own struggles? If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below. What do you feel while walking through Naomi's journey? And don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this, stories of justice, redemption, and second chances, are told here every week. Because sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden where the world only sees despair. And like Naomi, you too can turn rust into gold.